The alarm on my wrist cuff screamed 30 seconds before the coolant line blew, and that 30 seconds was the only reason I am alive to tell you this story. I am Daniel Ashford, station mechanic, third shift, ring 4 of Threshold Station, and on the day everything changed, I was lying on my back under a Velkaran pleasure yacht with my hands buried in a manifold that was about to kill me if I didn't move fast enough. Coolant, under that kind of pressure, does not forgive mistakes. It comes out hot enough to strip skin from bone in under a second, and the gauge in front of my face was climbing red. I rolled out from under the hull a heartbeat before the seal ruptured. A jet of white vapor screamed past where my head had been and slammed into the ceiling, and the whole bay filled with a hiss like 1,000 snakes. Alarms everywhere. Emergency vents kicked in. I lay flat on the deck, plating with my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my teeth, and I thought, not for the first time, that this station was going to be the death of me. That should have been the most dangerous thing that happened to me that day. It was not even close, because while I was catching my breath on a cold metal floor with coolant fog still rolling off the ceiling, 3 decks above me, a woman was standing in front of 41 delegations from across known space, being told, one after another, that she was not worth loving. Her name was Sael, Princess of the Coral Court, heir to 9 reef worlds and every trade route between them, and by every account I heard afterward, the bravest person I had ever met, though I did not know her yet. I only knew the sound that came through the shared wall between the yacht bay and the Grand Suitor Hall. I heard it while I was still lying on the deck, waiting for my hands to stop shaking. Laughter. Not warm laughter. The kind that cuts. I did not think much of it at the time. Ceremonies happened in that hall every week. Weddings, treaties, apologies between star nations that had been at each other's throats a generation before. None of it was my business. My business was getting the yacht's owner off my back before he filed a complaint that would cost me 2 weeks of pay. But the part I needed to finish the repair was locked in the fabrication annex, and the only door that was open led straight through the back corridor of that very hall. I want you to understand something about that walk. It was maybe 40 steps from one end of the corridor to the other. In those 40 steps, my entire life bent in a direction I never saw coming. The hall was built for light. Its walls were lined with crystal panels that were supposed to catch the glow of Coral Court nobility and throw it around the room in slow, shifting colors, the kind of beauty that made ambassadors from a dozen worlds stop and stare when they first walked in. That day the panels were dark, not broken, just empty, because the woman standing at the center of the room, surrounded by 41 empty gift pedestals, had no light to give them. I learned later what it meant. Coral Court royalty are born with a kind of glow along their spine and jaw, something in their biology that reads as beauty and status and worth, all at once, the way we might read a smile or a steady voice. Sael had been born without it, a condition her people called the dimming. The first princess in 600 years to carry it, and every single suitor who had come that day, warlords and poets and merchant princes from 11 allied systems, had looked at her unlit skin and walked away. I did not know any of that yet. I only saw a young woman standing very still, in a room that had been built to celebrate her, and now felt like a courtroom. I should have kept walking. I had a manifold to finish, and a coolant spray still cooling on my boots. I did not keep walking. I do not know exactly why I stopped. I have thought about it many times since, and the honest answer is that something about the way she stood there, spine straight, chin level, refusing to let her face show anything, even though the room had just told her, publicly, that she was not enough, reminded me of every time I had ever had to hold myself together in front of people who were counting my failures out loud. I recognized that posture. I had worn it myself. So I said, quietly, not even sure she would hear me, "Are you all right?" She turned. I remember the look on her face exactly. Not anger, something closer to disbelief, like she could not work out why a stranger covered in machine grease had spoken to her at all, let alone asked her that. "You should not be here," she said. Her voice carried that careful, formal rhythm that translation implants give to a language that was never meant to be spoken by a human throat. "This chamber is sealed for royal business." The door did not say that, I told her. It just said locked, which, on this station, can mean almost anything. For a moment, I thought she might call for a guard. Instead, something in her expression shifted, the smallest crack in the composure she had been holding since the ceremony began. "You know nothing of Coral Court values, mechanic," she said. "Maybe not," I said, "but I know engines. And I know the part of a ship that matters most is usually the one nobody ever sees glow. The reactor core sits buried in the dark, right at the center of every vessel I have ever worked on. Nobody claps for it. Nobody writes poems about it. But without it, nothing else on that ship even turns on." She went very still. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything, and I became aware of just how many attendants were standing around the edges of that hall, watching this exchange with expressions I could not read. "The right permits any sapient of allied standing to petition," she said finally, very quietly, like she was testing whether the words were true even as she said them. "It does not require rank." I did not understand yet what she meant. One of her attendants did, because I heard a small, sharp intake of breath from somewhere behind her. 41 have offered gifts today," Sael said, "and every one of them withdrew. Would you offer something smaller, mechanic, and mean it?" I want to be honest with you about what went through my mind in that moment, because it was not bravery, not exactly. It was the plain, simple fact that I looked at her and thought, this woman deserves better than a room full of people who walked out, because she does not shine the way they expected her to. "I have a socket wrench and half a repair shift left on a coolant job that nearly took my hand off 20 minutes ago," I told her. "That is genuinely everything I own that is not rented from the company store. But I will offer you the one thing that actually belongs to me, which is that I think you are worth more than every single person who left this room today. So there it is. My heart is on the table, if you will have it. It does not glow either. It runs quiet, but it works, and it will not walk away." The silence that followed lasted long enough that I genuinely believed I had just committed some kind of diplomatic offense that would end with me escorted off the station entirely. Then she laughed. A real laugh, surprised out of her, the first unguarded sound that Hall had heard all day. "Every suitor who stood where you are standing brought me gold," she said, "or warships, or poetry written by machines that have never felt a single thing in their existence. You brought me a socket wrench and an insult to everything my culture has ever valued about beauty." "I accept," she said. Her attendants made a sound like the floor had opened beneath them. Somewhere behind me the annex door finally clicked open. 3 hours too late to matter to anyone but the coolant job I still, technically, had to finish. I want to tell you that everything after that moment was simple. It was not. It was the beginning of the most dangerous week of my life, and not because anyone raised a hand against me. Because in the Coral Court, an acceptance like that was not just a personal matter. It was political. And politics on a station with 11 allied systems watching does not stay quiet for long. By the time I finished my shift that evening, still smelling of coolant and grease, there was a Coral Court escort waiting for me outside the annex, and a message chip with a single line written in Sail's own hand, rather than the formal court script that usually spoke for her. "The reactor core does not need to shine," it read. "It only needs to keep running. I intend to find out if yours does." I laughed when I read it. I did not know yet how much that single sentence would be tested. The trouble started 3 days later, when the Coral Court elders convened what they called a standing review, a formal hearing to determine whether an outsider's claim on the right could be honored at all. I was told to appear before 11 ambassadors, 3 elders of the Coral Court, and Sael herself, who was required by tradition to sit apart from me during the proceedings, as though we were strangers, being introduced for the first time, rather than 2 people who had already made a choice. The head elder, a tall woman named Corin Vale, who wore her authority the way some people wear armor, opened the hearing by stating plainly that no station worker had ever been granted standing in a royal right in the recorded history of the Coral Court, and that granting it now would set a precedent no one in that room could predict the consequences of. I did not have practiced words for that room. I only had the truth, so I gave them that instead. I told them I understood I had nothing to offer that measured against gold or warships. I told them that I had watched 41 delegations walk away from a woman because of something she had no control over, something written into her before she ever took a breath, and that if worth was only measured in light, then half the important things in the universe would never be counted at all. I told them that on this station, in the dark corridors nobody glamorizes, it is ordinary people who keep the air breathable, and the reactors stable, and the ships from falling out of the sky, and none of us glow either, and none of us are asked to. I do not know if it was a good speech. I only know it was an honest one. Corin Vale studied me for a long moment before she spoke again. Then she turned to Sael and asked her, directly, whether this was truly her wish, and not a moment of defiance born from a difficult day. Sael stood. She did not look at me first. She looked at every ambassador in that room, one at a time, the same way each of them had looked at her 3 days earlier. I have been offered wealth by men who could not name a single thing they admired about me beyond my bloodline, she said. I have been offered alliances by consuls who spoke of my worth only in terms of what my light could have meant for their trade routes, if I had been born with it. I was offered nothing of value in this hall, until a stranger who owed me nothing chose to see me instead of my condition. That is not defiance, Elder. That is clarity. The room was quiet after that in a way I had not expected. Even Corin Vale, who I would come to learn almost never showed her thoughts on her face, allowed something like respect to cross hers. The standing review did not end that day. Choral court law required a second hearing, 7 days later, and in the space between those two hearings, I learned exactly how dangerous political attention could be, even without a single blow ever being thrown. Word had spread across the station faster than any repair order I had ever filed. Some people congratulated me. Far more looked at me with open suspicion, certain that a mechanic had somehow manipulated a grieving princess into elevating him beyond his station. I began finding my work orders mysteriously delayed, my requisitions denied, for reasons nobody could quite explain. Small obstacles stacking up in a way that felt less like coincidence, and more like a message being sent by people who did not want me to succeed. Then, 4 days before the second hearing, the real danger arrived, and it had nothing to do with politics at all. I was pulled from my regular duties and reassigned, without explanation, to inspect the primary coolant relay for the entire Ring 4 docking cluster, a system responsible for regulating heat across every ship berthed there, including 3 Coral Court diplomatic vessels that had arrived for the standing review. My chief engineer told me it was routine. I did not believe him, but I went anyway, because refusing an assignment on this station meant losing my post, and losing my post meant losing any standing at all in front of the elders. What I found in that relay chamber made my stomach drop. The primary regulator had been tampered with, not broken by accident, but deliberately weakened, in a way that would look, to any casual inspection, exactly like ordinary wear. If it failed, and it was close to failing, the heat backlash would surge through every connected berth at once. Every ship docked in that cluster, including the vessels carrying 3 Coral Court elders, would lose environmental control within minutes. I stood there, staring at that regulator for a long moment, and I understood, with total clarity, that someone wanted this hearing to end before it ever reached a second day, and they did not care how many lives it cost to make that happen. I did not have time to report it through proper channels. Proper channels on this station could take hours, and I was fairly certain, from the calm and careful way that damage had been disguised, that whoever had done this knew exactly how long those channels took. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I got to work. I will not pretend the next 20 minutes were calm. My hands were shaking as badly as they had been the day the yacht manifold blew, except this time, there was no 30-second warning ticking down on my wrist cuff, only my own judgment telling me how much time I had left before that regulator gave out entirely. I stripped the housing, found the weakened seal exactly where instinct told me it would be, and realized immediately that I did not have the replacement part on hand. The correct part was 2 decks away, behind a locked storage bay, and the elevator that would normally get me there in 90 seconds had been taken offline for maintenance that same morning. I ran. I do not think I have ever run that fast in my life, through corridors full of station traffic that had no idea what was ticking down 2 decks above their heads, and by the time I reached the storage bay, my lungs were burning, and my hands were slick with sweat inside my gloves. The part was not where the manifest said it would be. Someone had moved it, or it had never been restocked, and for one horrible second I thought I had failed completely. that I was going to stand in that storage bay and listen to alarms start screaming through the station because I could not find one small piece of metal in time. Then I remembered the yacht bay, the one I had walked out of the day I first met Sael. There was a decommissioned coolant assembly sitting in that bay, waiting to be scrapped, and I was almost certain its regulator seal matched the specification I needed. I ran again. I do not remember most of that run. I remember reaching the yacht bay, tearing the housing open with hands that barely obeyed me, finding the seal exactly where I hoped it would be, and sprinting back to the relay chamber with it clutched against my chest, like it was the only thing keeping the whole station standing, which, in a very real sense, it was. I made it back with what the automated logs later confirmed was less than 4 minutes to spare. I do not remember installing that seal with any particular skill or grace. I remember my hands moving faster than my thoughts, muscle memory built from years of exactly this kind of work taking over, where panic would otherwise have made me useless. When the regulator finally stabilized, the readout easing back from red into a steady, ordinary green, I sat down on the deck plating and did not get up for a long while. The investigation that followed confirmed what I already suspected. The tampering was traced back to a member of one delegation, a trade consul who stood to lose a significant advantage if the Coral Court formed a closer bond with the station rather than with his own system, and who had calculated that a disaster during the review would end the question of my standing permanently, along with anyone unlucky enough to be docked nearby when it happened. He was removed from the station before the second hearing ever took place. I did not see him again, and I did not want to. When the second hearing convened, Corin Vale opened by acknowledging what had happened in that relay chamber, and I watched several ambassadors who had looked at me with suspicion a week earlier now look at me with something closer to consideration. She did not ask me to speak again. She asked Sael one final question, whether she understood that choosing me meant choosing a life without the wealth or the armies the other suitors had offered, and whether that was truly acceptable to her. Sael did not hesitate. I have spent my whole life being told my worth depended on something I could not control, she said. I would rather spend the rest of it with someone who never once asked me to glow for him, and never once needed me to. The elders granted the standing that same hour. I will not pretend I understood every part of the ceremony that followed, the old words, the careful rituals, the formal exchange of a small dark stone that Coral Court tradition uses in place of a ring, meant to represent light held quietly rather than shown outwardly. I understood enough. I understood that a woman who had been rejected by 41 suitors in a single day had chosen, in the end, someone who had nothing to offer her except the truth, and that in choosing me, she had also chosen herself, refusing once and for all to accept that her worth could be measured by anyone else's expectations. I still work on this station. My hands still smell of grease more often than anything else. I am no closer to understanding half of Coral Court tradition than I was on the day I first walked into that hall by accident, looking for a spare part. But every evening, when my shift ends, there is someone waiting for me who does not care whether I glow, only whether I show up, and I have come to believe that is the only kind of light that ever really mattered.